I set the table with 6 plates, 6 glasses, and a cake I hadn't yet cut. The scent of vanilla filled the air mixed with the faint sharpness of a candle I meant to light when the doorbell rang. My new apartment still smelled of cardboard and fresh paint, but I had arranged everything carefully: chairs, pulled close napkins, folded a welcome written in my own neat hand. My phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a message from my mother: "We need to talk now." I unlocked the door expecting to hear footsteps in the hallway, laughter rising as coats were shrugged off, the easy chorus of family voices filling the quiet. Nothing. Only the low hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of someone else's television. Another message followed. The group chat shifted. They were all at my brother's house. No one had bothered to tell me until it was too late. I stood by the doorway, staring at the empty corridor, the plates lined like promises on the table behind me. I felt the weight of silence pressing closer than walls. How had I become the guest of no importance in my own homecoming? The cartons were stacked neatly against the wall, blue tape sealing the flaps like closed lips. I had labeled them carefully, kitchen photos books, but I hadn't touched most of them since the movers left. Tonight was supposed to be the night when I opened them, with family here to pass around, frame pictures, laugh at old sweaters, maybe tease me for keeping so many coffee mugs. Instead, they sat untouched shadows in the corner. I straightened a chair that didn't need straightening, poured more water into the glass pitcher, though no one would drink it, smoothed the edge of the tablecloth until it lay flat without a crease. The room looked staged, like a photograph in a catalog waiting for people who never arrived. I caught sight of Ms. Green, my neighbor across the hall, as she walked by with her grocery bag. She glanced at me through the crack in the door and gave a small nod before moving on the soft shuffle of her steps, fading into the stairwell. For a moment, I wanted to call after her to ask if she had a minute, but the words stayed trapped in my throat. My phone blinked again. Notifications stacked up from the group chat, photos of my brother's house filled with balloons, bottles of wine, uncorked plates crowded with food. Captions said things like, "So much easier to gather here, and everyone made it." Not everyone. I pressed my thumb to the screen, then let it go dark again. The apartment felt colder even with the heater humming. I walked to the cartons and touched the one marked photos. My handwriting tilted slightly to the right, the way it always had. I slid my hand along the edge, but I didn't open it. My chest tightened at the thought of flipping through pictures no one else cared to see tonight. I went back to the table, sat down, and looked at the single candle waiting unlit. I reached for a lighter, flicked the wheel once, and stopped before the flame could catch. The wick bent as if bowing, but remained untouched. Around me the silence was thick, filled with the echo of voices I could almost hear. I asked myself the question I didn't want to answer. Did I really need their presence to feel like I belonged here? My gaze returned to the cartons in the corner. They seemed to breathe with the weight of memories, each one unopened, each one holding proof that I had lived, even if no one had chosen to witness it tonight. The phone lay face down on the table, its buzz pulsing through the wood like a heartbeat I didn't want to claim. I tried to ignore it, but memory has a way of rising even louder than any ringtone. I saw myself at 16 standing by a cake with half-melted frosting. My mother had promised she would be there, but she was across town at my brother's basketball tournament. Someone had snapped a blurry photo of me blowing out candles alone, my hair falling into my face, the kitchen lights too harsh. I told myself it didn't matter. I said I was fine. Years later, on the day my marriage ended, I sat in a lawyer's office with a stack of papers trembling in my hands. I called home, desperate for a voice to steady me. The response was simple, almost rehearsed: "Don't make this bigger than it is." That was all. Silence followed, and I drove back to an empty apartment carrying bags that felt heavier than their weight. I never forgot how the night smelled of rain and diesel from the highway below my window. Then there was the time I finished a double shift at the hospital, exhaustion pressing against my ribs. I asked if I could crash on the couch at my parents' house just for a night. The answer was delayed, then firm: maybe tomorrow. Later, scrolling through my phone in that dim parking lot, I saw photos of my brother hosting a party that same evening, the caption reading, "Family Night." I had laughed quietly then, because what else could I do? Sitting now in my own apartment, the blue cartons still lined up, I thought about all those smaller nights that had stacked themselves into this one. I turned the phone back over. The screen glowed with another stream of notifications, videos of wine glasses, clinking music pulsing in the background, my brother's friends cheering as if nothing in the world had ever been wrong. I flipped the phone back down, pressed the lighter to the candle wick, then pulled away before the flame caught. The motion repeated itself like a reflex, want stop, want stop. I sat still and listened to the refrigerator hum, the clock tick, the faint hiss of traffic far below. For a moment I let myself ask, with no answer waiting in the room. Why did I keep believing that one night, just one, would be different? Rain tapped lightly against the window, a hesitant rhythm that made the apartment feel even emptier. The clock on the wall slid past 8:15. I picked up my phone again, though I already knew what waited. A string of short messages blinked in from my mother. We didn't plan it this way. Another pause, then, your brother's place is easier. And finally, don't take it so personally. The words pressed down heavier than the silence itself. I set the phone beside the untouched cake. My hands moved on their own, arranging 6 plates in a neat circle, as if my family might suddenly arrive breathless with excuses. I poured water into 6 glasses, the sound too loud in the quiet room. Then I stopped. One by one, I gathered the extra dishes and carried them back to the kitchen counter. Only a single setting remained. A plate, a fork, a glass, one guest only. My chest tightened. Another notification blinked, but not from family. My ex-husband had sent a photo. The picture showed the crowd at my brother's house, wine glasses, lifted lights, glowing warm. In the corner of the frame, I saw my mother laughing. The caption read, "Packed house." I stared at the screen until the image blurred. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed, "Have fun," then erased it. The words felt like surrender, and I had given enough of that already. The cake sat sweating under its frosting. The knife beside it gleamed under the overhead light, too sharp, too ready. I touched the handle, then let it go. The sweetness I had planned to share seemed strange now, like an offering no one wanted. I lit a match and held it close to the candle's wick. For a second, the flame danced, casting shadows on the carton stacked in the corner. I drew it back before it could catch, blew it out, and dropped the blackened stick into the sink. Smoke curled upward, a ghost of what should have been. My phone buzzed again with another short line. "We'll celebrate later." I didn't answer. Instead, I sat in the only chair left at the table, folded my hands, and let the quiet settle in. The question rose in me, sharp and steady. How long was I supposed to keep standing outside the circle, waiting for an invitation that never came? The clock ticked steadily, each second like a small tap against my ribs. The room felt staged, set for a performance that never began. The 6 chairs I had arranged earlier stood around the table, but their emptiness accused me. I rose and tried something strange. I walked to the first chair and sat down, imagining who would have taken that place. My mother, maybe, with her clipped tone and quick glances at her phone. I sat there for a moment, waiting for her voice, but only the hum of the refrigerator filled the air. I moved to the next chair. Perhaps my brother would have sat here, tall and restless, tapping his fingers on the table as if already planning to leave. I leaned back, testing the way the seat creaked, then moved again. At each chair, I tried to conjure the presence of someone who should have been here. My sister-in-law, polite and cool. My uncle, who never stayed long at gatherings. Even my father, who rarely spoke but still filled a room with his silence. With each shift, the air grew heavier, as though the apartment itself was embarrassed by the farce. Finally, I returned to my own chair, the one I had set at the end of the table. I sat down slowly, hands folded in my lap. All the other seats looked at me now, empty and accusing. The candle in the middle of the table stood untouched, its wick bowed slightly, as if already resigned. I reached for my phone. For a moment, I thought of calling my mother just to hear her voice, even if it was edged with impatience. I pressed her name, held the phone to my ear. It rang twice, 3 times 4. Then her recorded voice spilled into the line, "Leave a message." I stayed silent. Finally, I whispered, I waited, and pressed end. My chest ached as if I had shouted instead of barely spoken. The screen lit again almost immediately with a new alert. This time it was not a text, but a live stream notification. I tapped it before I could stop myself. The screen opened to my brother's living room lights, bright music, playing voices overlapping. My mother stood in the background, holding a plate of food, laughing. Friends of my brother filled the frame, raising glasses, clapping shoulders. They had their arms around each other, pulling close for the camera. Family. Together. Without me. I watched until the image blurred from the sting in my eyes. Then I pressed the screen dark and laid the phone face down again. The silence in my apartment pressed closer, almost physical. I pushed back from the table, rose, and walked to the shelf near the window. A picture frame leaned there, waiting to be hung. It held a photo of me at graduation, smiling stiffly, while my family stood beside me, half turned toward my brother. Even then, I reached out, lifted the frame, and without thinking, turned it face down against the wall. The gesture was small, but it sliced deep. I left it there, back turned, like the people inside it. The room seemed to exhale. I returned to the table and looked at the cake. Condensation glistened on the frosting, tiny beads sliding down like sweat. The knife beside it shone under the overhead light. I touched the handle, feeling the chill of metal. I thought of slicing into the cake, but my hand froze. What would it mean to cut it? A celebration for one? Or proof that I no longer needed anyone else? My hand trembled. I pulled it back. The candle remained unlit, watching me with its crooked wick. I thought again of the chairs. I had sat in each one, tried to fill them with ghosts, but they only echoed emptiness back at me. My body felt heavy, as if I had absorbed the weight of every absence. I closed my eyes and memory rushed in again. A Thanksgiving years ago, when my brother hosted for the first time. I had arrived with a homemade pie, warm and fragrant. My mother had pulled me aside and whispered, "Next time, just bring store-bought, it'll save everyone time." She hadn't noticed when my eyes filled, too busy arranging the dishes my brother's wife had picked up from a caterer. I had left that pie untouched on the counter, still warm, still waiting. Tonight felt like that pie, whole and unnecessary. I opened my eyes to the present, the ticking clock steady, the hum of appliances low and constant. My hands lay still on the table. I breathed in deeply, trying to settle the sharp ache in my chest. I whispered the question aloud, though no one was there to hear. If I turned that frame back around, could I bear to see myself standing beside them again? The sound of my own voice startled me. It was raw, stripped of polish. The apartment seemed to listen, holding the words in its corners. I rose once more, crossed to the shelf, and lifted the frame. For a moment I almost turned it, almost faced it forward. But the strength left my hand, and I set it back down, still turned away. My reflection caught in the glass, faint and blurred, and I did not want to look longer. Returning to the table, I lowered myself into my chair, the only one that mattered tonight. I folded my arms on the table and rested my head against them. The surface smelled faintly of wood polish. My breathing slowed. The phone buzzed again in the distance, but I didn't move. Somewhere far below, traffic hissed along the wet streets. I listened to it like a lullaby. I told myself I would not reach for the phone again, not tonight. My message had already been left brief and unanswered. I let the weight of that truth rest on me, not fighting it anymore. My eyes closed. Behind them I saw not the empty chairs, not the cake, not even the glow of my brother's crowded house. I saw instead a small flame, steady, waiting to be lit. It was not yet burning, but it was mine. I let that image stay with me, quiet and patient, as the night stretched on. The phone buzzed again, dragging me out of that fragile quiet. I told myself not to look, but my hand moved anyway. A video call request pulsed across the screen. My mother's name glowed. For a breath I considered declining, letting the unanswered ring fade into silence, but some stubborn thread pulled me to accept. The screen brightened, filling with the chaos of my brother's house. Lights blazed behind her, laughter broke through like static music, thudded low and constant. My mother's face appeared, flushed from wine, her eyes darting to the side as if she were already distracted. "We'll do something another night," she said quickly, her voice strained, half shouting over the noise. Behind her, someone lifted a glass, and I heard my brother's voice call out, "Tell her not to worry." The words sliced through me more than any absence could. My mother tilted the phone, and the camera caught glimpses of a crowded living room, People pressed close plates stacked with food balloons still sagging from their strings. They were all there, all of them. Not one had chosen to be here. The camera wavered as someone jostled her arm. She laughed, covering the lens for a moment, then pulled it back. "Anyway, we'll talk later. Don't be upset." The call ended before I could answer. The screen went black. I sat still, the device heavy in my palm. My reflection stared back at me, pale and weary, caught on the glass. I set it face down on the table and pressed my hands flat against the wood. My fingers tingled as if the noise from that other house had left an echo in my skin. I lifted the knife, its handle cold, and positioned it above the cake. This time I did not hesitate. The blade slid through the frosting with a clean whisper, cutting into the soft layers beneath. A single slice fell onto the plate before me, the line sharp and undeniable. The sound of metal against porcelain was clearer than the laughter from my brother's house had been. I picked up the fork, held it steady, and took the first bite. Sweetness filled my mouth, heavy with sugar, almost cloying, but I swallowed it like a promise. The candle stood close by, its wick bent in silent surrender. I struck a match and touched it to the tip. The flame caught instantly, small but certain, casting a halo across the table. The light flickered on the carton stacked in the corner, on the turned-away picture frame, on the empty chairs that now looked less like failures and more like space waiting to be claimed. I sat with the plate before me, eating slowly, each bite deliberate. I did not rush. I let the quiet settle around me, not as an enemy, but as a witness. My mind replayed the call. My mother's voice rushing the background noise, drowning her words. My brother's careless interjection. For the first time, I did not feel the need to fight against it. The absence had already said everything I needed to hear. I rose from the table and walked to the shelf again. The picture frame stood turned away, back pressed to the wall. I lifted it, the glass cool against my fingers, and this time I turned it forward. My own face looked back at me from years ago, stiff smile, eyes hopeful. The family beside me seemed slightly blurred, as if even the camera knew where the focus belonged. I set the frame upright in the center of the shelf. I did not flinch this time. The flame on the candle flickered once, as though acknowledging the shift. I stood there, breathing slowly, steadying myself. A strange calm moved through me, not joy, not triumph, but something quieter, heavier. Acceptance, maybe, or resolve. I sat again at the table. The single slice of cake was nearly gone, crumbs scattered on the plate. I brushed them together with the edge of my fork, then set it down. My phone remained face down, silent now. I did not reach for it. I leaned back in my chair and listened. The rain had thickened, tapping harder on the window. The sound filled the room, washing over the hum of appliances, the ticking clock. It was its own music, one meant only for me. I thought of the question I had whispered earlier, whether family was still family, if presence had to be begged for. Tonight had given me the answer, not in words, but in the shape of this silence, in the taste of this cake, in the glow of this solitary candle. My heart still ached, but beneath the ache was something else, a line drawn, a boundary set without shouting. I had cut the cake myself. I had lit the flame. No one could erase that. I stayed there for a long while, letting the candle burn down, watching the wax pool and spill. Each drip marked the passage of time, soft and unstoppable. I did not blow it out. I let it fade naturally until the wick curled into itself and the flame sighed away. In the dark that followed, I felt no fear, only the weight of my own company, enough at last. A soft knock startled me. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it some echo of my own wish for company. But then it came again, gentle but certain. I opened the door and found Ms. Green from across the hall, holding a small plate wrapped in foil. "I baked too many cookies," she said with a faint smile, her eyes kind but cautious. Behind her, the hallway light flickered, casting long shadows. I stepped aside and invited her in. She hesitated only a second before crossing the threshold. The scent of warm sugar and butter followed her, blending with the faint sweetness of my cake. She placed the plate on the table, glanced at the empty chairs, then looked back at me without asking questions. A moment later, another sound drifted up the stairwell. Heavy steps, then a man's voice calling politely. "Excuse me, sorry to bother you?" It was the neighbor from downstairs holding a screwdriver in one hand. "Do you have a Phillips head?" Mine broke mid-job. I nodded and invited him inside too. He looked surprised, but grateful. Soon the three of us stood around the table, awkward at first, strangers bound only by shared walls. I poured tea into mismatched cups, set out small plates, and offered slices of the cake I had finally cut. The candle had burned low, but its glow still reached across the table, softening the edges of everything. Conversation began in halting steps. We spoke of hallway lights that needed fixing, the noise of traffic on weekends, the corner bookstore that sold old paperbacks for $1. Ms. Green laughed quietly when the downstairs neighbor confessed he could never keep a houseplant alive. I found myself smiling, the tension in my chest loosening with each exchange. The chairs that had accused me earlier now held voices, gestures, simple presence. Not family by blood, but people who had chosen to be here, even if by accident. As the evening stretched, I felt something shift. I was not waiting anymore. I was hosting. The plate of cookies sat half-empty, crumbs dotting the foil. The screwdriver rested beside a teacup, forgotten while talk carried on. The cake, once whole and untouched, had slices, missing evidence that it had been shared. When Ms. Green rose to leave, she touched my arm lightly and said, "Your place feels warm." The neighbor took his screwdriver and promised to stop by with a repaired lamp next week. I walked them both to the door, and when it closed softly behind them, the quiet that followed did not press down on me. It held steady, almost gentle. I picked up my phone and typed a single message to my mother. "I won't fill empty spaces for you anymore. If you want to see me, come here with respect." I did not wait for a reply. I placed the phone face down again, then looked around the room. The cake was cut. The candle had burned. The picture frame faced outward. The cartons in the corner still waited, but they no longer felt like burdens. They were boxes I would open on my own time, perhaps with neighbors nearby, perhaps in silence. I gathered the used plates, rinsed them in the sink, and wiped the table clean. The apartment no longer looked staged. It looked lived in. I opened the window a crack, letting in the cool night air. The city sounds drifted upward, tires on wet pavement, a distant siren, the low hum of voices from somewhere unseen. I leaned against the frame and breathed. The housewarming I had planned had not happened, at least not in the way I had imagined. But the night had welcomed me in its own shape, through small gestures, through unexpected guests, through my own decision to stop waiting. I felt the door close behind me after the last visitor left, and the sound was not heavy. It was light, like a promise. The night ended differently than I had imagined, but perhaps more honestly than I had hoped. I sat once more at the table, the candle now a small puddle of wax, the cake trimmed unevenly, the cup still warm with tea. The silence that filled the apartment no longer mocked me. It rested around me, calm and steady. For so long I had measured my worth by who showed up, by how many chairs were filled, by whether my family thought me important enough to cross a threshold. Tonight gave me another kind of mirror. They did not come, and yet the evening was not empty. Strangers who shared my walls had walked through my door and sat at my table. I had laughed softly, I had shared food, I had listened. That was real. The absence that once felt like a wound had become a doorway. I thought of all the nights I had waited, hoping for the smallest gesture, a call, a word, a presence. Each time I had bent myself smaller, hoping to fit into the spaces they left me. Tonight, I realized I did not need to shrink. I had filled the room with my own hands, my own breath, my own choices. Healing does not arrive like thunder. It creeps in quietly, disguised as ordinary moments, a plate of cookies, a borrowed screwdriver, the sound of tea being poured. These are not grand events, but they remind me that I am not invisible unless I agree to be. I rose and carried the last crumbs to the sink, washed the cups, and let the water run over my hands. The warmth of it settled me. I thought of the future, how the cartons in the corner would soon be opened, how each item would find its place, how this apartment would grow into a home. And I thought of boundaries, how they were not walls to keep people out, but doors I could choose to open for those who valued being let in. The lesson of this night was clear. Family is not always defined by blood or history. It is written in presence, in willingness, in respect. I no longer need to chase the love that hides from me. I can stand still and welcome what arrives with open hands. If you have ever waited at a door wondering if someone would come, perhaps you know this truth too. The waiting does not define you. The choosing does. Tonight I chose to light the candle, cut the cake, and share what I had with those who stepped inside. And in that choice, I found a quiet freedom. The flame may have burned down, but its warmth remains. If this story has touched you, carry it with you into your own rooms, your own evenings. Remember that you are allowed to face your own reflection, to turn the frame forward, and to belong to yourself first. And if you wish, stay with me for the next story. There is more light to be found.